We'll finish up Romans 11. We're going to go ahead and get into chapter 12. We're approaching the end. I don't know if anybody has any comments so far, other than what we do during class, but please, if you got anything, just let me know. Okay, we're going to start in verse 25. We had talked last week about the idea of the Gentiles. The root, of course, was Christ, and the tree that grew up, the branch that grew out of that, was Israel, and we've been grafted onto that branch. Before we were without, we were a wild olive tree, and now we've been grafted onto the one that's been cultivated and pruned and grown specifically for a specific purpose. And here we are. We are grafted onto the olive tree. That's the Gentiles. So, in verse 25 he starts, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion." And that's unfortunately what's happened a great deal is the great cause of splits and schisms in the religious world anyway. At one point we were all together, were we not? There was one church. There still is one church, and we understand that. But there was one group of believers. There wasn't 3,000, 4,000 groups of believers. There was one. And what happened? People started to get wise in their own opinion. They started thinking things that they're not supposed to think. They began to believe things they weren't supposed to believe, and they began to teach things that they weren't supposed to teach. And therein lies the problem. The vast majority of religious error is because people were taught a lie, and in turn they began to teach a lie, and and it continues to go down the road. And you look at the number of religious doctrinal error, and you look at the beginnings of it, and it begins far, far back, and that can has been kicked down the road so many times that it's become, to those folks, it's become truth. It has literally become to them. It's immutable to them. It's true. It's doctrinal truth, even though Scripture tells us otherwise. But they became wise in their own opinion. All right, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Now, what does he mean by that? They were wise in their own opinion, and that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So what is he saying here? The idea of blindness, was this an unintentional? Were they ignorant? No. This is intentional. This was an intentional blindness. This was they turned a blind eye toward. That's probably be more fitting to what we're understanding here. They willfully were ignorant. They turned a blind eye towards it, professing to believe the truth, professing to want to be close to God, professing to want to obey. Instead, what did they do? They rejected it. They rejected it without even saying they rejected it. What they did was they rejected. They wanted the Christ, but they rejected Jesus. The unfortunate thing for them is that they were one and the same. That was the problem. Okay, they did not want to believe that Jesus was the Christ, even professing that they wanted a Christ, they wanted a Messiah. But then you begin to wonder, did they really even want a Messiah? I mean, I imagine it's different for every single person that you would have asked back then. But I imagine many of them, if they really stopped to think about it, they really didn't want a Messiah. They liked things the way they were. People say that as well. Yes, they do. They like the idea of a Jesus, but boy, they don't like the idea of doing what he told them to do. The idea of a doctrine and a law and a truth and a commandment, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be told to do something. I don't want to be told to do anything. All right? And let's think about this for just a second. And this is supposition on my part, but let's think about this for just a couple moments. Say for example that the Jews had, and of course Scripture tells us that they would not. God knew their hearts even before they were born. He knew that they would reject him. But imagine for just 1 second, had the Jews had the Israelites wholeheartedly accepted the gospel. I mean, bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Said, you know what? He's right. He is the Messiah. We're going to obey. Think about this. In their heart of hearts, knowing how they were, what would have been the odds of the Gentiles being accepted fully into the church had the Jews had complete and total control of it? It would have been one of the hardest things in the world for the Gentiles to gain acceptance in the church. So if you think about what God did and what God allowed to happen, He did it in the most, of course, it'll get to it here in a couple of seconds. In verse 33, and this goes into the idea of what God is and how He caused this to come into being. Of the depth and the riches both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are His judgments and His ways past finding out. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has become His counselor? Or who has first given to Him, and it shall be repaid to Him? For of Him and through Him and to Him are all things, to whom be the glory forever. Amen. You think about the wisdom of God, and that is part of the wisdom of God. The idea that, guess what? I'm going to give it to the Gentiles. Gentiles were more accepting of the Jews coming into the church than the Jews would have been of the Gentiles coming into the church. The Gentiles would have made it some exclusive club, and they would have done exactly what they were considering doing in Jerusalem. First, you have to become a Jew, and then you can become a Christian. That's what's going to happen. But no, the apostles, through that divine inspiration, said, no, that's not what we're going to do. That's not the purpose behind all this. The point was not that everybody could become a Jew. The point was that everybody could come to Christ. And that's the way He did it. But you think about what could have been had God's grace and His infinite wisdom not, of course, ruled the day, which it always does. All right? In verse 26, and so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and He will turn away ungodliness from Jacob, for this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So now, does He mean, now think about this, because there are people who, the misinterpretation is rampant here. Okay? The possibility for being misinterpreted is incredible at this particular point in time. And so all Israel will be saved. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that every Jew, no matter how they do, if they continue to try to abide under the old law, they will be saved? Is that what it means? No. Okay. It's the elect. Okay? The elect come out of the Jews and it comes out of the Gentiles. The idea of all Israel, it says all men will be saved. All who will be saved? Does that mean that every single person? No. It means that those who are faithful, those who are obedient. And only those who are obedient. So will obedient Jews be saved? Of course. I mean, obedience is obedience no matter who it comes from. Obedient Jews will be saved. Obedient Gentiles will be saved. Obedient, whoever you are, if you are obedient, you will be saved. And that's what He's trying to make sure they understand. His desire, of course, is that His people would be saved. He wanted them to come to repentance. He wanted them to come to obedience. But they refused. All right. Verse 28. Concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. Now, what is he talking about here? Concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but concerning the election, they are beloved for the sake of the Father. What does he mean? Concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. What does that mean? The new law replaces the old law. The Jews are their enemies. He's speaking here to the Gentile Christians. They are enemies of you for what? For your sake. How are they enemies? Okay. The idea of they are enemies. Remember, there's this. I don't want to call it a warfare being fought, but you have two groups of people who are vying for God's favor, right? You have the Jews who are still vying for God's. How are they vying for God's favor? They're holding on to that. They're holding on to the law of Moses, right? Right? Yes. Okay. So you got the Jews who are still holding on to the old law for the sake of the law. That's it. This is the way we've always done it. Remember, look what he says up here. Concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but concerning the election, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. So you have the it's really fascinating to look at. You have a group of people who are holding on to the old law. How did they get the old law? It came from their fathers, right? All right, it came from their fathers. Now here who are the fathers he's talking about? He's talking about the patriarchs. Okay, but remember, it's the heart of the law came from the patriarchs, right? That's where the heart of it came from. I will make you a great people, and I will make you. There's a seed promise, a land promise, and a nation promise. Okay, the nation promise and the land promise are bound up in the old law. That idea, it was delivered to them through the Father. Okay, so here you've got these people who are still holding on to and clinging on to an old law that's outdated. It's been nailed to the cross. It's no longer in place, but they're still holding on to it because what? It promised them the Father. It promised them the Father. So they're still holding on to that old law. And God's saying, for concerning the election of the saints coming to me through Christ, concerning the election, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. Yes, the old law came to them, and yes, they're still clinging to an old law. But remember, I promised their fathers that I would do this for them. I promised their fathers. I gave Abraham a promise. And that promise was what? I was going to tell them how to get to me. And not only that, it was through the law that Christ came in the first place. See, he said it all dovetails, it all fits in together. It just fits in so neatly. And why do people want to make this big jumbled mess? I don't know. But the law came to them through their fathers, and it was through their fathers that they're loved. Unfortunately, they're clinging to the law simply because it's the tradition of the elders. It's the tradition of our fathers. We're still sons of Abraham, and they still want to cling to that. He says, I want you to give that up. That's not what's going to get you to me. That's not what's going to get you to me. All right? Don't cling to the Father, cling to the Son, so to speak. Okay? All right. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. What does irrevocable mean? What does irrevocable mean? It can't be taken away, right? For example, we have certain rights that are irrevocable. We can't give them up. They are inherent in who we are. Different countries have different rights that are given to us simply because we are a citizen of that country. We have rights that are ours, and they've been given to us by God. They've been enumerated by the Constitution, and they are irrevocable. We can't give them up unless we decide we no longer want to be what? Citizens. Verse 29. Okay, it's the same. The idea of repentance meaning what? Turning away, giving something up. Okay, same thing. Same exact mindset, same exact. It's just a different wordage. The idea of it can't be given up. It can't be taken away without our consent. All right? The gifts. I'm sorry? Romans 11. Romans 11. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. Irrevocable. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. They cannot be taken away, and the only thing that can happen is that we give them up willingly. God has promised them, and what God promises is irrevocable. He will not take them away without our consent. So that means what? If we're going to fall away from God, whose decision is that? Is it His or ours? It's ours. All right. The calling of God are irrevocable. For as you were once disobedient to God, who does that take into consideration? Everybody, right? We were all once disobedient to God. No matter how righteous we thought ourselves, we were all once disobedient to God. We were in sin. Because if we weren't in sin, there was no need for baptism. But there was need for baptism, which, by its very nature, means that we were in sin. For as you were once disobedient to God, yet have now obtained what? Through mercy through what? Their disobedience. Now, what does he mean by? Okay, think about this for just a second. Why did the gospel go to the Gentiles? Because the Jews had rejected it. They had shown time and time again their hearts were hardened. Their hearts were not close to God. They had rejected it in disobedience to God. So what happened? The gospel went to the Gentiles. It doesn't mean that it was completely withheld from them. It means it wasn't brought to them. There are people who are getting the word of the Lord extraneously from different people. But the gospel was not taken to the Gentiles until what? It was evident that the Jews had rejected it. So look at what's happened. We've obtained mercy because of what? Their disobedience. Because they rejected it, now we have it. Now look at this. Even so, these have also now been disobedient, that through the mercy shown you, they may also obtain mercy. Now think about that for just a second. What does he mean by that? Think about that. Even so, these also have now been disobedient, still talking about the Jews, all right? That through the mercy shown you, through the mercy that we've received, let's just put ourselves in that position for just a second. The Jews have rejected it. Now that grace has been shown to the Gentile, us, you. Through the mercy shown you, they also may obtain mercy. What does that mean? How do they obtain mercy through us? Okay, but we have to go a little bit further then. Okay, so we've got it now. How do they obtain it? Through us. That's what ends up happening. We end up being the example. We're the ones that have been shown to embrace the gospel. The ones been shown to be the ones who are most receptive to it, who are the most grateful for it. So what happens then? What do? We're the ones taking it. It's no longer the Jews bringing it to us. We're the one taking it. Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example, and I want you to think about this for just a second. It's been said, and I hate to say it, but there's really not much doubt in my mind, that eventually, and when I say eventually, probably within the next 30 years, you're going to see African missionaries coming to the United States to preach the gospel. Think about that for just a second. We've been the ones showing, okay, we're going to take the gospel to these poor folks that have never heard the gospel. We're going to take it to them. We're going to let them hear the gospel for the first time. And the church there is growing and flourishing and thriving and all that kind of stuff. Where the church here is it's evident. I mean, folks, you look at it, it's withering on the vine. Is it still strong? Yes, it's still strong, but it's weakening. So what's going to happen is eventually we're going to go into an age in this country, we're going to go into an age of apostasy. And Lord willing, those folks over there are going to be sending missionaries to the United States to knock on doors. How embarrassing is that? How humiliating is that? Not because it's them, not because it's these people, but it's because now we have need to come to repentance. How embarrassing is that? But that's what's going to happen. This is what's occurring right here. The gospel was sent to the Jews. The Jews took it, a few, in the grand scheme of things, a very small percentage, took that gospel message, and it was holding steady, but it wasn't growing. It wasn't growing through the Jews. There was a small group of disciples, and it was holding steady, but the vast majority of the Jews were rejecting it. So God said, all right, this is what I want you to do. Through inspiration of the Holy Spirit, He says, I want you to take it to the Gentiles. The first big one, of course, was Cornelius. That was the one, and with the baptism of the Holy Spirit, that idea of the Holy Spirit came upon them, then it was evident. These people were accepted of God. These people wanted it. These people are the ones that are going to take it to the next level, so to speak. That's when the church that's when it took off like nobody's business. That's when the biggest growth of the church was when the Gentiles were finally accepted and taught fully for the first time. And then what happens? Then it becomes I don't want to say this and you take it the wrong way. Then it becomes a Gentile church, essentially, because the Jews were a small minority. So now the Gentiles are taking it, and they're taking it to the Jews. How things change, right? Things flip-flop so quickly. God's always at work. And see, the problem is we tend to get our pride. We tend to get our pride hurt. Listen, if that's the case in 30 years and the church is that bad, I pray that somebody somewhere thinks enough of me to send a missionary or a minister somehow, some way, send somebody to teach my great-great-great-great-grandchildren the gospel if they've not heard it. And listen, that's entirely possible. That's entirely possible. And I hope somebody thinks that much. I hope that somewhere in India, somebody's saying, "Oh, those poor Americans, they don't look at the church. There's nothing there. They need help. So we're going to send folks there." Maybe that's going to happen, but you know what? That's okay. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. They're of course. I wish. I certainly wish they were preaching the truth. But you're right. They are. They are. They look at the world as needing their message. So what do? They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. I certainly disagree with the teachings of the Mormon Church in almost every way. There are a few things that we agree upon, but that's not really the problem. The problem is where we disagree. But you know what they're doing? They're sending their folks two at a time. They're going out into all over the place. There they ride on their little bikes, all nicely scrubbed. But you know what? Unfortunately, they're teaching them false doctrine. Yes, sir. Yes, yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. None of us. I mean, I said this last week. None of us have. I don't think any of us have Jewish lineage. We're all grafted on. We're all part of that grafted on branch. And that's what we've been doing. We grabbed hold of it. Uh, always. History is cyclical. I mean, it continues to come. It goes around, and it appears. I read a thing the other day, and they said, this is the interesting thing. I found this fascinating. Barring any major, huge event, it is likely that atheism is going to disappear from this planet. Now, that's not what we've been led to believe. People are falling away at huge numbers. Yes, in this country. But in other countries, people are rejecting atheism, and they're embracing a faith of some kind. Now, unfortunately, Satan wants to fill up that void with something of his own making. He's going to fill it up with denominationalism and false doctrine and all of those things. But atheism is slowly disappearing from the planet, not taking hold. No, atheism is never. Atheism is in our list of concerns, in our list of opponents. Atheism is way down here. Atheism is way down here. We really don't have enemies in the atheist community. Okay, that's not where I concern myself with. Where I concern myself with is false doctrine. Okay, if you don't want to believe in a God, that's your business. But where we find ourselves at issue is where people believe in a God, but they're going to teach something false about him, and they're going to teach something that's blatantly untrue, lies about God. We always do. We always do. Whether we want to admit it or not, we have to have faith in something. As people say, "Well, I don't have faith. I want something proven." And it's so easy to poke holes in that. It's almost not even fun anymore to poke holes in an atheist when he says, "Well, we don't rely on faith." Of course you do. Of course you do. If you spend $1 at the store, you have faith. Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many. If you don't go to the doctor then. Don't go to the doctor if you don't have faith that he knows what he's talking about. You have trust in him whatsoever. That's not even really like I said, atheism is not really an opponent of ours. But it's very interesting to see that we've gone from atheism into a faith, and then we've gone back down into it, and we go back up into it again. But you're right. History is cyclical. It just keeps going in. Everybody loses faith, and then we regain it again. Then we lose it again. Then we regain it again. And some major event happens to get people all excited again. And of course, being the fickle creatures that we are, that doesn't do it for us anymore. So we start to fall away again. Then we are roused back up, and that just seems to be the way we go. All right. So anyway, through our obedience, they've obtained mercy. They're obtaining it because what? We were taking it to them. We were instructing them. We were making them jealous. That's okay. I'll make people jealous of me if it has to do with God. I want people to be jealous of my relationship with God. I don't have a problem with that. That's a good kind of jealousy. That's something I want. That I want that relationship. So what do I need to do? Do what I'm doing. Follow an example. All right. For God has committed them all to disobedience, that He might have mercy on all. Oh, the depth of we've already done this. The idea here is that God's mindset is so far above ours. He sees forwards, He sees backwards, He sees side to side, He sees up and down. He sees all areas. And what are we restricted to? We're restricted to what we can see. And we see what happens here mainly only because it was written down, not because we have any gift of hindsight. We wouldn't have any idea what happened in the first century had not God instructed His inspired workers to set it down in writing. That's the only way that we know what's going on here. That's it. So we're restricted by the senses. What we can see and what we can smell and taste and touch and all of those things. God's not restricted by any of that. He sees, in the very beginning, He saw the church. In the very beginning, He saw the crucifixion of His Son. The very beginning, He saw His people, and He saw His people's rejection of Him. He sees all of it. And that's why God's methods are so far above ours. We're thinking, short term. He's thinking, look, folks, this is a long, centuries-old slog, and we're just going to keep going and keep going until there's a time appointed where it's all going to come to an end. You don't know what it is, and you don't need to worry about it. Can you imagine what the mindset of men would be if we knew when the end of the world would be? We would make a hash of it so quickly. We would find some way to mess it up so badly. Okay, I think the world would be a terrible place to live if we knew when the end of the world was coming. It'd be bad because we would all devolve into our own mindset, and it would be a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, let's think about this for just a second. Did the nation of Israel? Well, it wasn't really a nation of Israel at this point. It was Judea. Had God's people been told when Christ was going to come? Yeah. They told the seasons and the time. Been told what to look for. Been told where it was going to be, who it was going to be to. Everything they needed to know. Why? How do we know that? Well, because they had men that were looking for the Jesus. They knew that because they'd seen the signs, and they knew that there was a Savior that was born, and they were looking for it. Okay? So they knew what was going to happen. Now, had they been paying attention, had they been doing what they were supposed to be doing, what would have happened to herald the coming of this newborn Messiah? Well, if they had been righteous people, if they had been people who had been seeking after God, they would have done everything in the world to welcome this child. I mean, you wouldn't have had men from another country, wise men from another country who were seeking the child coming through, and then a king who was looking to ambush these young parents and their child, trying to find out where the baby was born, and hey, come back this way and let us know where he is. It wouldn't have happened that way. But that's what happened. Like I said, let people find out something, let them get in charge of something, and they will absolutely mess it up as badly as they possibly can. And that's exactly what happened. So instead of this Messiah being born in a great, of course, this is God's way. He knew this was going to happen. This is not something. But that just goes that's what goes to show. That's what happens when mankind gets involved in something like this. We mess it up. Yep. The way we think sometimes. we want to live life on our terms, and unfortunately, our terms aren't very good. We mess things up badly. Okay, let's go into chapter 12 real quick. Talk about chapter 12 just a couple of minutes. Anybody got anything they want to say about the last little bit of it? All right, so we're great. We're doing well, right? Right? We've been delivered. We've been grafted on. It's through, listen, it's through the obedience of the Gentiles that the Jews are still being preached to. That's the only reason, because they had rejected it. So it came to us. Thank God. And I mean that literally. Thank God. He didn't reject us simply because his people. He didn't just say, well, if they don't want it, I'm not going to give it to anybody. It kind of brings into play what Jesus said. It's not meat to take what is given to the children and throw it to the dogs. Glad he threw it to the dogs. Glad he threw it to the dogs. Because that was us. I don't take offense to that at all. To the Jews, that's what I was. I was a Gentile. I was a dog. Wasn't really worth much of anything. Whatever they could get from commerce between me, but as far as they were concerned, they weren't going to fellowship with me. They weren't going to interact with me as little as possible. Okay? So I'm glad he took it and threw it to the dogs.
How smart we are today. Let's think that there would be research that would go back to this time we're talking about and try to prove that Jesus was the Messiah to the Jews, that the Jewish nation would want to find that out, that they made a mistake.
At this point, remember, I'm thinking truthfully, honestly thinking truthfully at this point. I believe that the hearts are so hardened that there's no desire to find a Messiah. There's no desire to find. There's no push to find a Messiah. You talk to most Jews, even not just secular Jews, but even religious Jews. They have a hard time believing in a hell. They have a hard time believing in a resurrection. They believe that the here and now is the time that we exist. And there's no interest really in finding a Messiah anymore. It's become a ritual rather than a mindset and a lifestyle. Well, I've said this before. If the belief was truly there and the faith was truly there and the hope was truly there that they claim being, say, an Orthodox Jew, that every attempt would be made to bring back true Judaism, but it's not there. It's not. It's just not. They've rejected it. Their hearts have been hardened so much that at this point it has become a ritual rather than a lifestyle. Even amongst the Orthodox. It's just, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way our fathers handed it down to us. So this is the way we're going to hand it down to and it's just this, I don't want to offend anybody who might be watching, but it's a dead religion that's being handed down year after year after year after year.
There's only certain things they can do.
Yeah.
Really, they can't do any of them because the rabbis.
Well, they can't do any of it.
They're not.
There's no high priest. There's no priesthood. There's no anything, and that's they've given up. They've given up so much, and not received anything in return. All right, chapter 12. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God. Now, what mercies? The mercies that He's just shown to them, right? Yes, through His mercy towards us. So I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God that He has shown to you. Now, in this, he's saying he's saying proven by the mercies of God. Okay, it's been proven that the way we exist, the fact that we have a faith, the fact that we are members of this church that that His Son died to establish, and that we've been added to as we become Christians. I'm proving it by these mercies, by the mercies of God. That what? What are we supposed to do? We present our bodies as what? A living, what kind of sacrifice? A living sacrifice. Okay? We're not expected to immolate ourselves on a pyre. Okay? We are not expected as Isaac was going to have happen, as he was going to be sacrificed on Mount Moriah. We're not expected to do any of those things. We present individually ourselves as a living sacrifice. I cannot present someone else. They cannot present me. I can't do my child. They can't do anyone else. We individually, each of us, present ourselves to God as a living sacrifice. Now this hews right back to the days of old with the old law. That remember we talked about this in Leviticus. What were these men supposed to do? The head of the household was supposed to what? They came before the priest and they brought that animal, whatever it happened to be, goat, lamb, sheep, bull, whatever it was. They brought that animal themselves and they presented it to God as a sacrifice. As a matter of fact, they were the ones that were required to give the sacrifice. Okay? They laid their hands on top of that and they cut its throat. Now, I'm glad we don't have to do that anymore, aren't you? The idea of fitting one of those things in the back of our car and then getting it out when we get here, trying to pull that sucker in this, and what are we going to do with it now? This whole thing would just be. I was listening yesterday in my Greek class. I get it online. I was listening to it. It was talking about the blood of bulls and goats. They said that on the day of Passover, when the people would bring these animals in, they said that the usual population of Jerusalem was around 100,000 people. Right? They said on the day on Passover, when the animals, or any of the feast days, any of the sacrifice days, the number sometimes would swell up to 1 million people. I want you to think about this for just a second. A family was expected to bring an animal, and we're gonna be pretty generous. We're gonna be pretty generous. Let's figure that there were 10 people to a family, and there were likely far fewer than that, but sometimes there may have been as many as 10. So you've got 1 million people all there, and for every 10, you would have at least one animal. I want you to think about that. Somebody do some quick division for me. Think of 1 million people divided by 10, which is what? 100,000. 100,000. 100,000 animals being brought to Jerusalem for slaughter. And they would take that animal and they would pull it up and then they would cut its throat, and the priest would hold that big basin of blood, and they had like an assembly line. They would go up in the stairs up to the altar. All right. So the priest would, the high priest would take that blood and he would pass it up in this assembly line, this giant vat of blood. How much blood is an average goat? I don't know what about a quart? 2 quarts? Okay. So you've got 100,000 animals, so 200,000 quarts of blood. And they would take that blood up and then they would splash it on the altar. That was the point behind it. They would splash it on there. Can you imagine the scene? Can you imagine that? Oh, and there it goes, and constant. This was a constant thing from sun, because they had to get all of these sacrifices in on that day. So this was a constant thing. It was like, there wasn't a time for standing there. We're going to miss poor whatever the animal's name was. We're going to miss poor Chaim. We loved him like a No, it's like cut the throat, bleed him out, take the animal back, roast it, get that blood up and splash it on the altar. So it was a constant, non-stop, all day long thing with that much blood splashed on it. Can you imagine the smell and the noise and I can't even begin to imagine what that was like. But you know what? God's watching it and He's saying, this is what I'm wanting. This is what I expect of you. This is everything that I desire from you. This is faithfulness to me. Now He said, forget all that. Forget all that. I'll give you the sacrifice. You kill him. I'll accept his blood, and we don't have to do this anymore. We did it without even realizing. We did it without even realizing that was happening. He slipped it in on us, and we had no idea. We unintentionally availed ourselves of the only means of reconciliation to God, and we had no idea we were even doing it. Boy, the depth and the riches of God's grace, the wisdom that passes all understanding. Would we have done it intentionally? Being humans, I don't think we would have done it intentionally. We would have found some way to mess it up. We would have instead put him on a throne somewhere or done something else with him instead of doing what we were supposed to. So what does God do? He slips it in behind us. We do it without even realizing it. We avail ourselves of the only means of reconciliation to God. All right. So anyway, real quick, we'll finish this up. But this is what I want you to do. I'm not expecting you to sacrifice an animal. I don't want you to sacrifice an animal. Your sacrifice has changed. You don't have to kill anything. There's no blood spilled. But I want you to present yourselves to God as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. What makes us holy? God. What makes us acceptable? Obedience to God. All right. What allows us to give ourselves as an acceptable sacrifice? God. God makes us acceptable. God makes us holy. So it's through God that we're able to accomplish any of this at all. Without God's intervention, none of this would be any good. Could I walk in off the street having never known His Son, having never known God, offer myself as an acceptable sacrifice? No, I couldn't. There were things that had to be done to the sacrifice, even under the old law. The animal had to be clean. It had to fit certain qualifications. You couldn't just sacrifice anything. So what do we have to do? First, we have to be immersed in water. What? To scrub ourselves from sin. All right. Even under the old law, the animal had to be washed clean before it could be sacrificed to God. Makes common sense. That's just common sense. Animals are not always the cleanest things in the world. And you've got all of these animals walking around Jerusalem, and all of them are, animals don't look where they go to the bathroom, right? They go wherever they go, and you walk through it. It was not pleasant for several hours. So what you have to do, you had to wash it, clean it up before you could sacrifice it. Well, that's what's happened. So what have we done? We've been washed clean through water for the forgiveness of sins, and now we can offer ourselves up as a sacrifice. Our lives won't be taken. We'll still be allowed to go home that afternoon. But what does He want us to do? Present ourselves, which is what? Our reasonable service. Under the old law, it was a reasonable service to offer to God. What does it mean reasonable? Acceptable. Fair. Equitable. That's all He's asking. Listen, I redeemed you. I brought you to myself. I gave you my Son. This is reasonable. This is a reasonable sacrifice. This is a reasonable work that you can do for me, is to present yourself as a sacrifice. That you can do what I tell you to do. You can worship the way I tell you to worship. Behave the way I tell you to behave. It's reasonable. He's not expecting any great thing from us. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing fantastic. I just want you to live the way I want you to live. All right, we'll stop there because we can keep going easily. We'll finish up chapter 12 next week. So go ahead. The idea, especially look at verse 2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We'll talk about that especially next week. Anything else? All right, thank you.